So as I said, Beyond the Deal is all about what happens once you've got the publisher for your game. And we're going to explore bringing your project to market. So first up, we've got Falko. I think Falko is with us, hopefully. And he's going to talk about one of the areas, so hybrid games, so the hybrid revolution, the missing link between hyper and casual games. Falko, how are you doing, man?
Hey, can you hear me, Oscar?
I can hear you fine.
Perfect. I'm doing great. How are you?
Good, not too bad. Long time no see. But then I can say that about everybody. It's like the last 2 years have disappeared almost. So,
exactly. Yeah.
In fact, I think my last event that I went to before the pandemic was when you invited me over to, was it Kiev, I think? I can't remember.
Yeah, exactly. That was right when the news were coming out that you're not allowed to travel anymore.
Exactly. So anyway, I think you were the last industry person I saw outside of my close arrangement. So anyway, Böcker, I'm going to shut up now and let you talk and tell us all about the hybrid scene. So thank you very much.
All right, thank you, Oscar. Yeah, thanks everybody who showed up bright and early. One of the few things that I feel is easier in these digital events, because you haven't been to at least most of us haven't been to a big party with free alcohol last night. So yeah, thanks for showing up. And as Oscar said, we're going to talk about hybrid casual games, and especially if you're a developer, what kind of opportunities are lying in there right now. You might think hybrid casual, that's something that was a while ago, but no, it's actually more current than ever. Let me quickly share my screen here. First, maybe a quick word about myself. I'm Falko. I'm head of brand marketing for JoyPac. I have been involved in the developer relations, business development part of JoyPac for a long time though. So I'm coming from the angle of talking to developers, and now I'm kind of focusing on more actually bringing you guys more insight in what JoyPac is doing, what we're looking for, how we're seeing the market right now versus just talking about the nitty gritty of the games. JoyPac itself we're a hyper casual publisher based in both Asia and Europe, with China being one of our biggest markets. So we started out helping people bring their games into China, self-publishing developers, mid-sized publishers, and so on. But we're also working with developers on new products to publish hyper-casual games worldwide. We're also interested in the hybrid revolution. We've been talking about this for a while, but this topic has been changing, and that's one of the few things that I want to talk about today. So let me start with kind of the time frame that Oscar and myself just talked about. The early 2020, when Archero, I'm not sure if everybody's familiar, action game, you control a character with one finger, shoots automatically, but then has a bigger meta layer where you unlock new equipment, new skills, and so on. And there's more of a long-term goal, but still very much presented as a very casual game, was on the height of its success. Launched in April of 2019, it grew steadily over the year. And for something that people considered at least partially a hyper casual game, it had extremely long stay and had a lot of advantages that I'll be talking about in a moment here. But that was like the hot topic. Everybody wanted to make a game like this. And one of the last conferences before the lockdown was the Pocket Gamer Connect in London. And there we all talked about it, and amongst the publishers we joked like, this is Archero the conference. We saw at least like 5. Yeah, I saw 7. Like, we're talking about how many Archero-Clones we saw, and everybody wanted to get in of it, and everybody thought this specific style of game is going to be the next big thing that kind of maybe even overtakes hyper casual or makes hyper casual as a genre obsolete and have it replaced with this new thing. But then what we saw is like a lot of these games were very similar, and they were good games. There were games like Arcade Hunter or Tales Rush, like games that are very similar and that had good production values that maybe added to the game, but none of them really had the very big and very long-term success, at least visible in the charts that Archero had. A lot of these drilled down into more details. Usually, I would say in general, it's not always a good idea to make your game more complex, because you might actually narrow down your audience rather than adding more that will get more people interested. Although financially, that's not always a bad thing, right? If you have a very core audience that cares deeply about that style of game, maybe it's better to have a more invested but smaller audience. And that's a lot what hybrid casual is about, right? You kind of want to combine both. You want to combine the mass audience of a hyper casual with a little bit of deeper gameplay. The issue was that these clones didn't do as well as people thought. People thought, okay, these are going to take over the market. We're going to see great innovations in this kind of subgenre, but we really didn't. Hyper casual itself grew, it changed as hyper casual does. We see different kind of games and ideas and themes and settings all the time, and it remained pretty consistent and even grew, while hybrid didn't have the crazy resolution, at least yet, that people expected it going to be. So, but then over time, we saw the focus switch a bit onto other hybrid concepts, and now it is coming back a bit. But first, like, why hybrid casual? Why do we want to change from hyper to hybrid, right? Like, what is the idea there? And the idea is looking at the weaknesses that hyper casual has. Hyper casual has a lot of advantages when it comes to the number side of things, but it also has some downsides. And hybrid casual takes things from the casual to midcore style of games and tries to marry those with what hyper casual does well. So I'm saying a lot of hybrid this time. But yeah, so I'll use one of our games here as an example, which is more of a hybrid style of game, a little bit tower defense-y game called Dead Ahead that we're publishing in China right now. And it's doing very well for us there. So first of all, it's obviously the increase in retention, especially long-term retention that people are looking for. Hyper casual games can easily get there 40, 50% day one retention if they're a good game, fun game, but they're struggling keeping players interested 7 days or even 14 days or even beyond that in the game. But of course, these hybrid casual games that introduce more meta layers, more functionalities, more concepts from casual and midcore games to keep people around are meant to increase that number. And that's what we're seeing. We're seeing about twice the amount of day 7 retention in Dead Ahead that we're seeing in our average hyper casual game. Same goes for session lengths. How long are people playing? How long are they invested in how much time do they invest into the game? Generally, that's about twice as much per session, and even more than 3 times overall, meaning that they also play more often in the day that they would do with hyper casual, which is interesting because you would expect hyper casual being super fast, quick, fun games that are very likely that you come in to just play a round or two. But it is this kind of meta, this further purpose beyond this one session that keeps people coming back even more than just a very enjoyable, quick, fun session. It is also a way of introducing more attractive in-app purchase options. It also kind of works for rewarded ads. So overall, for the monetization, it has an effect because of course, normal ads run better if you have more playtime. I'm not sure if I have to explain that, but if people stay in the game longer, if they spend more time per day in the game, that also means that they will watch more interstitial ads, more other ads. But then with this layer of this extended purpose, so to say, they are also more interested in maybe watching a rewarded ad, which is better for the publisher financially, to get something in the game, to unlock an item, to unlock a stage or something that brings them an advantage because they're more invested in this kind of long-term improvement. And the same goes for in-app purchases, which are usually non-existent or a very low percentage of the money that a hyper-casual game makes, right? We've seen less than 5, less than 2, less than 1% in some cases. And with in-app purchases in hybrid games, depending on the game, because there's a very long range, because you could say call something that is mostly hyper casual with a little bit of midcore or a little bit of meta being hybrid, but you can also say something that is mostly a midcore game and then tries to present itself a bit more. So there's a wide gamut of like what in-app purchases can look like, but we're expecting 20, maybe even 30% or more revenue through in-app purchases rather than through advertisement in the long term in these kind of games. But there's also, of course, the challenge of keeping the CPIs low. There is an issue with these games that all these advantages don't help you if you can't keep the CPIs lower. Otherwise, you would just do a midcore game, right, where you have extremely high CPIs, but then through the rest, you still have the chance of making it back. So the balance here is the important thing. Having the games be hyper casual enough that you can still approach a wide audience while still taking advantage of all these mechanisms that you see in Midcore game. So I already said that the Archero-Clones kind of died off, and then we're looking for something else now, because people are getting better at bridging this Midcore gap. And it's not only a Midcore gap. I think that was one of the fundamental issues in the beginning of hybrid casual games, that people were like, okay, I'm going to take my average town builder game or action RPG game, and I'm going to focus on that and make something that is hyper casual, but also that. Completely skipping over casual games, puzzle games, arcade games, the very healthy kind of segment that exists in the mobile market as well. Completely skipped over, but I think there's a lot of advantages looking at those games and trying to implement some of their advantages into hyper casual games and taking that step first, because these are way closer together, way more aimed at a more mass audience, less specific. So there's a lot of advantages that you can take out of that, and you can also stay closer to the typical hyper casual game and introduce more of that without going too far away from your basic idea or concept. So that is one of the steps. So we're looking at farming games, we're looking at tower defense, arcade idle games, more puzzle concepts that are coming in, but also those simpler mechanics that have a more immediate effect on gameplay. In puzzle games, you have a little bit of meta, but a lot of the stuff is very connected to the gameplay. A lot of the purchase decisions happen in the level. A lot of the upgrades are more immediate. And I think this is something that hyper-casual games are looking more and more at these days, rather than having this complicated meta system that you have to, feels, at least at first, very separate from the core experience, and you kind of have to learn it separately. And in the issue that you have with hyper casual is you don't have people for a long time if you don't have this meta system, but you also don't want to overwhelm people with a complicated meta system right away. You want to introduce it slowly and carefully. So there is a limit on what you can do on the meta side, or how it is designed to keep people hooked right away to get all the advantages out of it. And then something that I feel is just starting is sticking to the more relatable settings. Hyper casual games often live off being something that people do every day in their life. Very normal, mundane activity that is kind of fun, kind of satisfying in itself. And a lot of the hybrid approaches didn't use that at all. They went straight to fantasy, straight to strategy games. And I think that removed them quite far from the user acquisition advantages that we would have with a hyper casual game. So it was much more difficult to get the people in there. You were much further away from it. So you're really doing a lighter midcore game rather than a expanded hyper casual games. And I think we'll see, and we're already seeing with the farming games and so on, we're seeing taking more steps towards these relatable settings. And I think there's still a lot of room to kind of play around with that. So what happens next, and how can you, if you have a hyper casual studio or a midcore studio, how can you profit off of this? Where do you fit in, and what are publishers going to do, and how can that help you? And in general, how will that market change? So I think we talked to a bunch of people. We've seen a bunch of articles on Pocket Gamer. Right now, there's a good article from Voodoo right now about this topic as well. So feel free to check that out. From what we can tell, most hyper casual publishers are actively investing into hyper casual game in some shape or form. A bunch of them have internal studios that have already been working on this. Some publishers like to go out of their existing network of developers, but also some talk to the developers that they're already working with. So if you've already signed a deal with a publisher and you think this is something that you can do especially well, that you can excel with, bring this up to your current publishing partner, that you have a few of these concepts, because they are looking into putting some money into that. That might be investing into the development in external studios. That could be the internal studios. That might also be acquiring external studios for this purpose. My Games just made a purchase that goes into that direction. trying to build this kind of like internal hybrid casual, a little bit more mid-core casual strength. So they're building towards this. Also, there's some outside investors, just general investors looking at this. So right now, I feel it's a good time for studios to position themselves as that, showing the experience that they maybe had in the past and how they could bring these genres together. And I think, as I said, we're not done with these hybrid subgenres yet. I think there's more to come. I think people will figure out more ways of going at this. We were super narrow in the beginning with the Archero-Clones, which was definitely ahead of its time with this, but then it kind of stopped for a while, and now we're seeing people branch out. And I think just with hyper casual, where we're finding new genres, new ways of new interpretations of the style of gameplay every day, I feel that we're going to see this more and more with hybrid style games as well. As I said, I don't want to cause panic. I'm not of the one of those people that say like, oh, this is going completely to replace hyper casual. Hyper casual is going to be gone. Everything is going to be hybrid games. We still see that there are some advantages with hyper casual games. Some are current and some are a little bit longer lasting, and I think won't go away at any point soon. So first of all, right now, hyper casual is still most publishers' core business. We start talking about this. Voodoo, Omar Games, a lot of people are talking about this, but it's not like we make most of our money with hybrid games right now. It's still hyper casual games. This is still what most of us publishers are doing best, and this is something that we'll keep focusing on for a while. You will see the percentage change. Hybrid will take potentially a higher importance within our portfolios, but it's not that we're going to stop making hyper casual games anytime soon. Also, hybrid games don't follow the same fast iteration process. One of the big advantages of hyper casual games is the speed, that in a few weeks you'll have a prototype, then a MVP version, then a full version out in the market. And this really competitive, really quick, really fast changing environment, of course, lives off the simplicity of those games. And once you start adding more meta that require a little bit longer term thinking, a little bit more balancing and more content, you'll add time to that as well. So I think there's just a natural limit of how good you can be with that. And also there's a learning process of getting that to the most ideal state. So it will take people a little bit to kind of find the right way of prototyping something that you can test very early on, like a hyper casual games, but you already have a plan of then quickly adding these further mechanics to keep people engaged, but still not work on a game 3, 4, 5 months, finding that medium there and still having this high output. Because at least when you're very close to the hyper casual side of things, you need to be able to fairly quickly and cheaply make prototypes that you're happy to throw away in favor of something that is doing better, that has more potential. So you can't overcommit to a hybrid casual game like you have to do in some cases with mid-core games, where you're in deep and then you have to figure it out and get it just right. Also, the CPI question, right? CPIs are rising for hyper casual games. We're not sure if hybrid casual games will be more on the hyper side or more on the puzzle to mid-core side long term. So they have to be cheap enough to kind of make sense when it comes to all the advantages that they have, right? They are only advantages if they behave like hyper casual games, or at least close to them in the market. I feel that the other settings and themes will help with that, but it's still open if this long term will work. This is a danger for both hyper casual. It's like, is any hyper casual game going to be so expensive that it can go hybrid in the first place, or the other way around, where it's never going to be low enough for a hybrid game that you can compete with a hyper casual game? So I think there is at least an argument that it's not going to be black and white. There is going to be a happy medium where both of these types of games can coexist. And then most of these, not all of these games directly compete with each other, right? Like there's some elements that you can add where it's still fairly hyper casual, and but once you're over a certain threshold, the game becomes so complex that it doesn't offer the same experience anymore of I'm just going quickly and then play around and I'll be happy with that. And if there are too many hybrid casual games, maybe people will still look for these very short, fun mini experiences. You're not completely replacing them. I think what we're seeing is that there's a minimum of features that you're going to expect in hyper casual games. I think that already happened. We're seeing a lot of level-based games. Nobody sees endless games anymore because of how the economics work with interrupting gameplay through ads and so on. So I think after all of this hybridization, we'll see that there are a couple of features that you can't go without anymore in a hyper casual game, but I'm not sure if that necessarily means that that all of these games will be considered hybrid. Maybe if you compare them to the very first hyper casual boom, but I think there'll be still a very clear distinction about what we call hyper, what we call hybrid, or if we're going to have a completely new name for that at that point. So summarizing, there's a good opportunity for hybrid games right now that are more closer to the casual side, not too far of a jump to midcore. And I think as studios that have some experience with puzzle, with meta elements, now is a good time to reach out to publishers. Maybe if you even don't know if they're interested in that, most of the hyper casual games are very willing to hear you out and start some experiments and see what they can do in that market. And I wouldn't be confused if casual publishers, haven't talked to many of those, are also eyeing more into the hyper side and seeing if they can get closer to this middle ground from their point of view. So lots of opportunities for development studios out there. And yeah, that is it. I hope this was interesting for everyone, and let me know if you have any questions here, but also reach out to me on LinkedIn or via email at any time. We're happy to answer all the questions you might have about that.
I think that's great stuff. So in particular, obviously the kind of elephant in the room are things like the IDFA changes, so SCARA network and various privacy controls, so particularly in the UK. We've recently had the age-appropriate design code come into force. So there's a lot of kind of concern about kind of data capture and so on and so forth. Is that having any impact, do you think, in terms of the nature of the hybrid design? Is that affecting the way you're looking at hybrid design itself?
Not right now. This is pretty fresh, right? So we didn't really make any consequences based on that. Of course, these kind of regulations is always something you're looking at. And some of the midcore elements that have been strong there are now kind of getting taboo, right? Like the loot box and so on. So I think it's something that people will look at. But as I said, I think it will be more on the casual side of things, where I think there's a little bit less worry about these elements, where it's you don't have to go full midcore monetization just yet in hyper casual games. You can still have something very simple. It just has to feel worth for a player, right? If you're a bit more invested, even something simple as buying a character skin or something will get more attractive. And that might not bring you to 50% in-app purchases, but it might bring you from 1% to 8%, which would be great already, right?
No, exactly. And I think that's the key thing, isn't it? You know, what we're seeing here with the hybrids, and as you know, I'm a fan of this model, is this increasing percentage and still acknowledging the value of the ad. I mean, the ads can be incredibly important for not just monetization, but also retention and engagement for a wider audience. And I think acknowledging that value is there. In fact, one of the things I'm trying to do is to get people to think about these games in layers. So the mechanic, the core kind of thing that you do. Now, I use the term context rather than metagame because I've got another reason I use the word metagame. Context for me is all about the sense of purpose and progression. And I think a lot about things like the hot dog economy. So, you know, how imbalance can actually make the game more interesting and make grind more purposeful, more useful, more, you know, enjoyable. But also, you know, the sense of unfinished business that makes me want to keep coming back and keep playing. For me, I think the transition between hybrid and living game is when you start looking at what I call the metagame. I mean, so that means things like the social collaboration. That means things like the sort of the community aspects and stuff like that, and also seasonality. Are you seeing, you know, these hybrid experiences becoming more like living experiences, or do you think they're going to stay more on the sort of casual hyper side of things?
Yeah, I think step by step they will try. There are some additional hurdles, right? Because multiplayer in some form is often one of the main things that brings us into this like more engaged community meta game in that sense. You're perfectly right. I should have said like maybe meta systems rather than meta game, because that refers to like
that's why
how people play the game.
Context.
Yeah. I think a lot of hyper casual publishers will be afraid of going into anything that's multiplayer, right? We're already taking multiplayer concept and faking the multiplayer in it because it's so much easier and faster, and because it comes with so much more. But it is a very big driver for monetization in midcore games as well, right? So it's something that is definitely interesting. But I think in the beginning it will be the more simple concept. I think for Idle and a few of those where you see like the meta layer being more in the strategy of playing the game, where people getting together and kind of like finding new ways of optimizing the way to play the game, I think this will be more apparent. And you see this in puzzle games even, right? Like people have strategy guides for Candy Crush. So that kind of stuff, I think we'll see more of.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think for me, what's interesting is if you look at the lessons of the production process for hyper-casual games and how that's transitioning into hybrid, and I'm actually trying to apply those lessons in living games as well. I think what we see is, studios doing lots of experiments with hyper-casual games to get the kind of first stage working. Some of the games will get released, some of them won't. Then it's some more experiments where a subset of those games can become and evolve into these more hybrid experiences. Again, some of them will get released, some of them won't. And then finally, where you find those games that work in all those contexts that you can turn into living will be those kind of like the sort of spearhead of the kind of longer term retention experiences. So I think we'll see these more diverse portfolios from publishers that are really looking at what works for the audience. At least that's my feeling.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, one of the issues with that was that you didn't have enough time with one hyper casual games to turn that one game into it, right? They just didn't live long enough to add those things. So it has to be a different concept that looks at the first concept, but is a separate game. I think it's much more realistic to say once we have things that are a bit more hybrid, that game can become more alive and grow from there, kind of like a lot of midcore games did in the beginning as well, right? Where they didn't have this wealth of meta and community in the beginning, but like gradually grew towards that.
And also we can learn some kind of profound lessons from the way, for example, where Archero breaks in the middle in terms of its long-term retention, because I don't really see the need in having multiple heroes. Well, there's some sort of fundamental kind of design principles we can then take from that and apply into our future designs and see if that then works. So anyway, I could talk about this topic forever, as you know. Sadly, we don't have beer and we're not sat around the table together. However, I thought it was delightful. Thank you so much for taking the time out to talk to us about the hybrid revolution.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Have a good day.
Great, thanks then.